Welcome everyone to the 11 o'clock talk. Infosec Hills to Die On. What we're doing is not fucking working. By Johnathan Kuskos.
I appreciate it.
So Johnathan here has 13 years of professional experience in vulnerability research, pen testing, and security education. Built foundational hacking skills during a decade of early digital exploration and mischief, which is the best way to get knowledge. Known for contagious enthusiasm in hacking and mentoring newcomers to offensive security, passionate about combining technical expertise with a down-to-earth approach to security, and as a company is apparently hiring.
Yeah. Okay, testing 1, 2, cool. Thank you very much, and thank you HuSecCon for having me today. I'm a very awkward person with nervous energy, so if I start talking really, really fast, just kind of like wave, and I'll try my best to slow it down. It's weird hearing someone like rattle off bullet points about you while you stand next to them just looking awkward, so okay, over that. Yeah, in short, I'm Johnathan Kuskos. I have been a professional hacker for the better part of about 15 years. And just when I think I'm getting to the point where I can say I've seen it all, a new tranche of something new comes in and then that goes out the window. So the reason I made this talk is basically around the thesis of a conversation I had in a bar with a friend one day, which is basically we spent around $200 billion on cybersecurity defenses in 2024, and we're still fucking losing. We're spending all this money on proactive controls, on risk mitigation, on threat matrices, on prioritizations of vulnerabilities, and we're not stopping hackers. We're identifying and fixing vulnerabilities, but we're not actually stopping hackers who are hacking. As someone who is a career hacker, I can think of a lot of things that annoy me when I'm trying to recon or enumerate through an environment. And so this talk is kind of a story-driven exercise around all the frustrations that I see, what I think we can do about that. I don't know why they put me in the defensive track talk, so I hope this still vibes with some folks. Please interrupt if you have any questions. I hope this is very entertaining. So let's start off with my first annoyance, which is the number of CVEs that exist. I promise this was in my slide deck before Robert Hansen talked about it yesterday, but literally yesterday, as I'm in the expo hall, someone said, hey, did you hear about the Notepad++ CVE today? No, 1,000 came out in the last week. It's your eyes just kind of glaze over at this point when someone says, oh, a new CVE came out. It's like, great, which one of these is XSS? 47,000 of these 300,000 CVEs is some form of reflective cross-site scripting. It doesn't mean anything at that point anymore. And at the same time, if you want to go down the rabbit hole of severities and which one we prioritize most, there's no factor of how much effort goes into remediating them. For instance, if anyone had to do triage during the Struts 2 RCE, I think it was like 2016, 2017, that was a whole framework overhaul of remote code execution that took a huge engineering lift compared to one application that has some sort of like remote code execution that you could just do on off over the network. They're both tens, but the amount of effort to fix a one-liner configuration flaw versus a whole framework overhaul is completely different. Okay, so going down the eternal dilemma of pretty much any project that you want to manage, good, fast, cheap, pick two. On the security assessment front or vulnerability scanning front or red team initiative, whatever you want that to be, it's all the same. The good and cheap things are slow, the cheap and fast things are low quality, the good and fast things are expensive. So to kind of break that down to what I see in my world here, is that good usually means that it's comprehensive, it's deep, we have the right skill sets in place, the applications are well scoped, we have all the different user accounts that we need to perform all the different permutations of role-based access checking, and it's usually very expensive. Getting one of these to fit in budget is obviously, or often, a challenge. The fast ones are fantastic, but we dip in the other areas in order to bring up the speed. Automated, parallel, we've got some prioritization in place. Maybe we have some external assistance, some third-party contractors we're hoping to put more legwork in so that we can get done in a faster time. Also very expensive. Most automation tools start to fail because you're either hitting rate limit blocks or your authenticated accounts get locked out. This is assuming you're taking a one-size-fits-all approach and applying like one methodology to 200, 500, 1,000 different applications that all behave inherently differently. And again, usually costs a lot of money. Now the cheap ones. Anyone who's running security at a small, medium business, I feel for you, I've done it before, we don't have a lot of funding. Cheap usually means open source tools, it means self-attestation, it means you don't have the funds for some other external party to come in and validate, like, yes, this work was complete, and cohesive. We see this all the time in pen tests where you might ask the assessor, are you done? And they just say, yeah. Okay, how do I know? How do we prove that? How do we actually show that you tested everything? And it's not a matter of blame, it's just that there is no mechanism for completeness. It's almost best effort, and there's no way to really track past that. Then again, compliance minimums, you're checking the checkbox, you're doing just enough to get by to where you can say someone took a look at this, but again, there's no definitive clause around what a complete assessment is, or what even a security assessment is. Does that mean you ran an on-off scanner? A lot of people check that compliance checkbox. Do you just look at the API docs and role-play a threat model in your head? And you're like, okay, we gave that a threat model because you were looking at how the calls could have been done and how they could have been manipulated, but you never actually looked at the code or you never actually had a conversation with developers. These all count as security assessment. Really low-grade ones, but still a security assessment. Also, throw less money at it as little as possible, preferably none. Usually you get an intern. If your CISO says Infosec is a cost center, that is usually an indicator you're not going to get much support from the top down anyways. I've never seen that end well. I personally see it as a validation center, as a trust center, but now we're getting a little bit more philosophical. And this did not come out well on the slide, so we're just going to skip that. It's basically just everything all together, the differences between them. And again, for good and fast, you throw as much money as possible at it, and for cheap, you maybe get an intern who has no cybersecurity knowledge. Now, my forte is in web application assessments. And again, getting this back to we're not stopping hackers from hacking, I'm approaching that from the lens of, are we testing as completely as possible to identify all the risk factors that a malicious actor would take advantage of? So in the perfect world, for a scoped web application assessment, we have a dedicated staging environment or a QA environment, and everyone knows those always 100% mimic production, right? Yeah, all the chocolate, exactly. It's not just some emulated form of how a thing should be behaved, or the databases aren't actually connected, or it's full of functionality that has to be populated with data, and dummy scrape data just doesn't quite work because it's really meant for actual customer data in a certain format. But because of PII, we don't want to deal with that. And in fact, that nightmare is usually an argument enough for folks to just say, okay, no database is connected, and so now I'm exercising functionality that has nothing in it, which means you're not testing it in the same scenarios that a real attacker would. Sufficient time is allocated for the assessment. Again, real attackers don't care if it's a 5-day, 3-day, 2-day assessment. We time box our stuff and try to scope it well because we have to get on to the next thing. That doesn't translate as well. Dev team being engaged and responsive, best effort. Source code being provided is more rare than you would think. Sometimes the code isn't even up to the quality of whatever the staging environment is. So now you have different repos to track down, which is another effort and another lift. And then let's assume that you have all the right accounts to test every possible permutation of role-based access. And the assessor has an empty calendar to go through it. They have all the right tools to do it. They have access to logs. They have a dedicated testing environment. So this is all assuming that the perfect stuff happens. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I have never gotten all of these. And I know to ask for them now. I know to play the policy game and the diplomacy game to really solve their problems so that they'll bend over a little bit backwards and help me get these things done. It never happens. Like Lord of the Rings. Unapologetically nerdy over here. Oh, sorry. I don't think they know about multiple testing accounts, pen tester. Source code, documentation, logs, MFA tokens? What about dedicated staging environments? I wouldn't count on it. There are a few exceptions. In most situations, you have someone on the dev team who is a good partner, either an engineer who is pro security or some manager that you have a good relationship with. API documentation existing in Asterix is usually you get an email with some endpoints explained. And that is just that, some endpoints, and to some degree of completion. The assessor having the appropriate tools for going wide, you might just have the community edition of Burp if your company isn't going to expense Burp Suite Professional Pro. You might be using the open source version of TroubleHog. You might be on a very underpowered company laptop, and this is all running from your local. And those are all going to be resource constraints on the assessor. This is a fractional pen test that my company performed for a client. Got the permission to talk about this, but we're still going to redact it. Where we had already done a previous assessment on the whole application about 6 months prior, and this was a new feature coming out. The scope document said, focus on v2/building/asterisk endpoints. Everything else is end of life. And I really wanted to get on my soapbox and talk about how if something is being presented to customers and they're paying for it, it's not end of life and we still have responsibility for it, but that was the wrong time for that particular one. So let's just say entirely in scope, V2/billing. So I start taking a look at the endpoints. We find that there's a V2/billing/invoices. You make a request to it, get an empty list as a response. So I start throwing various automated scanners at it. I start permutating as much as I can. There's not a lot of attack surface here. There's very few headers to even check. All we've done is we've logged in. We then find that there is data that needs to be provided, which was not in the API docs, for the functionality to execute. We provide a customer ID, some line items, a SKU, quantity, price. That returns back with a job ID and a URL that we can pull for status on the invoice. When we go to that particular URL, we just get the response pending. Okay, so something is happening. Again, we're already outside of the scope of what is testing here because we're outside of billing. And you always have to kind of go back and forth and rehash with the customer because they might not exactly know what the actual bounds are. They think they have an understanding of it, but it might not be the person that actually architected it or drafted it. So as I start looking through it all, we find some other things. So this is when, because I had knowledge of the application, we had tested it before, we go back and we look at it again, we find a feature flag that has to be enabled, where you have to enroll into billing V2 core for that invoice system to be active. We also find a processing terms section, where without that, the backend filters were dropping the requests. We also find that a webhook has to be invoked into another billing system because it's just how the application is designed. And it's okay to not know all this. The whole point is that there's all this extra stuff that you would never otherwise know that wasn't in scope. A calendar had to be configured before the invoices would be populated. You had to select your first billing date, otherwise they would fail silently. And that is why, if we can go back, not the pending, and that's why we were returned with the empty list, because none of those preconditions were met. Once you exercise all of those, now this starts working in the way that it should, but all of this to say, we're approaching this wrong, and this is how most fractional API pen tests will go, or even API tests in general. If you don't have all the information necessary to exercise it, you can't just give someone a list of endpoints and say, go do the scan, go do the test on it. It's so contextual, and I think that we miss a lot of vulnerabilities from this, being kind of just like how assessments happen. So, in order to just test this one endpoint that was in scope, we had to enable a feature flag, satisfy legal consent, configure business prerequisites, provide a live webhook. Again, not in scope, not in any of the documents. So we're not just testing that particular endpoint, we're testing all the glue in the infrastructure that holds it together. It's a monumental task to realize that in a time-boxed assessment. Usually the assessment has to go on a whole lot longer, more things need to be focused on. And the whole point here is that I think that we're just approaching this wrong as a penetration testing industry, and it makes defenses a lot harder. Thinking back to what the bare minimums might be on compliance regulations, like I said earlier, there is no definition of what a security assessment is. It could be a scan, it could be looking at something. You could run a vulnerability scanner against something, against a load balancer that's dropping all the packets, and that's no results found, as sad as that is. OWASP I like a little bit more because they at least provide good guidance on what you can do to actually perform a good test. Just blurb of text to show that there's a lot of details here. But at the same time, top 10 lists are ruining us. My biggest gripe about this is that, we got 2017 or 2021. The newest version is going to come out in, I think, November of this year. It's about every 4 years. On the 2017 version, the top one is injection, but 4 of these are injection. XML internal entities, cross-site scripting, and security serialization are all forms of injection. So we're just overlapping here for no reason. If you look at where they shift in 2021, again, most of the same stuff is in the top 10. Now we have yet another injection, server-side request forgery. So the principles don't really change, and when someone says, hey, test something against the OWASP top 10, it's really not giving you anything. It's almost like we have this facade of what a easy bar to reach can be, and then we pat ourselves on the back for it and say, hey, great, we tested against the OWASP top 10. It's not a risk framework. It's just guidance. It's just where to start if you have nowhere to start. A lot of young pen testers are doing this too. They'll say, like, hey, we tested this against the OWASP top 10. So what? You can't test an application for SQL injection if it's not connected to a database. these are some case studies that we went through. And from this perspective, you are a security engineer who's charged with securing your network. So it's a Friday afternoon. You're a cheerfully, happily captivated security engineer. You learn that a new product is going live. It's going to be in customers' hands on Monday, and you're told they need the go-ahead from security. Product is reasonably large. There's a large attack surface. Again, it's going to be in customers' hands on Monday, and you're charged with securing this. But let's say you're in a contentious market, the company's trying to survive. This is meant to be the cash cow that gets the company through the next quarter so that they can start thinking about where they go from here. And so you have a choice to make. Do I say that there's no vulnerabilities found because there's not enough time to really go deep? Or do you break your back over the weekend trying to find as many criticals as possible? What usually happens is that gets in someone's hands who just accepts it as business risk because it's tangent to what their win conditions may be. And I'm not to say this paints devs in a bad light. I'm just trying to say that this is hard, and there's more diplomacy and philosophy at stake than just doing the assessments. And it sucks that the only real course of action is to say, do the best you can with the time that you have. And I think that happens in real life a lot more than people really want to admit. We paper trail as much as we can. We try to get a WAF up. I think that security teams should be in control of the WAF if at all possible, because then they can own at least some compensating control of blocking attacks from getting to the thing that's normally vulnerable. You do take on a little bit of liability there because you never want to stop your actual customers from getting to the application. But otherwise, if it's in the developer's hands, you just have another channel of approvals to go through. And again, this is scenarios Friday afternoon, and I'm sure most of us have been there. There's some base stuff that we can do. Instead of tearing the whole SSO apart, just check for misconfigurations. This is all about doing the best you can in a small amount of time. We're essentially doing a pen test speed run at this point, and so you sacrifice a ton of quality just to get through stuff. Number two, and these are all situations that have happened to me. You're a new hire and security lead for a company responsible for providing technology solutions to a network of hospitals. GRC manager lets you know it's time for the yearly compliance review, and they let you know that last year's results came back squeaky clean, which is usually elbow, elbow, nudge, nudge. We're looking for your checkbox. No non-low vulns discovered on last year's enterprise-size network vulnerability scan. It never happens. It never happens. So now let's say we have the situation where a new relevant zero-day is discovered. These always seem to happen on Friday afternoons. I'm pretty sure empirically these did happen on Friday afternoons, Log4j being the last one. Or I guess Spring4Shell, if you want to take the other variant of it. The CISO has to report to the board on everything, the current state of how we're handling this, and just ask you, like, hey, are we covered? Is everything covered? I have to get a response back to them. Well, what the hell does everything mean? Everything is literally every possible device that's connected, including employees' BYOD stuff, bring your own malware, as I like to call it. And every team is going to have a different definition of asset inventory of what they think that they own. Even sales and marketing will have a different interpretation of things that are out there that engineering will not know. So how do you test everything? How do you define it? Most of us are not the Facebook, Amazon, and Google security teams of the world, as much as we want to be. We're average teams with average capabilities, trying to do the best that you can while being under-resourced and under budget. So when we are approaching how we're going to secure our environments, I think that this reality needs to, be more publicly spoken about. I'm seeing organizations act as if they have the backing of 200-plus security engineers that have all said thumbs up to whatever the current situation is, when really they're not in a place to really have that argument anyways. Diplomacy matters so much more in getting buy-in across the aisle to actually getting these things fixed. But most of us just have normal resources and normal time. Again, zero-day pop on a Friday, you're a lone security engineer, maybe you have one or two people with you who are a bit more junior, and you're in charge of security for an entire company. What do you do? It used to be reliable to watch Twitter threads. That Infosec community has kind of died down lately. Back network channels of folks, groups of friends who are working at various different companies is where all of this communication happens anytime a new zero-day pops. I'm in a couple of Signal groups where we kind of have Chatham House rules groups, or Chatham House rules agreements. Security leaders at various different companies, and like when Log4j happens, it's like, hey, how do I secure these 2,000 assets that I know of, and there's probably 500 more, like what's everyone's shadow IT policy or shadow IT strategy? LinkedIn actually is not a bad place to figure out like what folks are doing, because we talk pretty openly about it. The bigger firms have marketing and PR teams who are racing to get some article out about how to do it, so don't focus on like doing all the research yourself. Rely on one of them. We'll all learn the same stuff at the same time. Generate a list of known knowns from best effort sources. And so this is to really just understand the environment that you're charged with knowing, if you don't already know it. This is when people start getting into the realm of like, okay, I'm going to scan my own network. I'm going to scan everything that our company has and start building that initial list. And what I often see happening is the first fallacy that anyone who gets into network security kind of realizes is that if you try to test all ports across a Class B network range, it's going to finish in several years. And not many people know that the top 122 most commonly used ports will encompass 80% of the total things that are found. This is just a statistical study done by Zendesk. So just by changing the top ports from being everything to 122 will give us 80% coverage for 99.8% less time spent. Again, it's not everything, but you want to start with that one so you can get initial real results. And this is assuming you don't have a list of hosts that you own. Same thing with web applications or things that are external on the network. This is a little 9-line script for budget attack surface enumeration. And I guarantee you there are security vendors that are charging at least $10K for this with another $1K add-on per bundle of hosts that have to go into it, on top of the add-ons for whatever threat management system or attack surface management system that they have. But this is the way how an engineer who is at a mid-level company with no real budget can start getting data for themselves that is actionable. And so again, if you're doing literally a speed run external network security assessment, this is where you can at least get some real results by end of day to say, hey, I don't know exactly what we're going to do, but here's where we're going to start. Disclaimer. I think Swift on security said this best. This shit is fucking impossible for anyone to pull off correctly. You basically have to have comprehensive knowledge of every technology and every implementation factor, and then have omniscience of your current configuration state on every service. And then you need an entire department of other IT people with a pathological drive for doing it right instead of green light turn on. The only times I have found places that operate this way is when it's like someone who's in this room who is one of the security leaders at that company. Not to like pat ourselves on the back or anything, but I've worked at companies where you don't have that, and there's just friction after friction after friction. And younger security engineers don't do themselves any favors when their first initial communications with developers. We see this all the time in vulnerability reports with passive-aggressive language. Oh, this thing can be fixed simply by just doing, and it's very belittling. No wonder development teams don't want to work with us. We don't give them any real reasons to. We have to be better about that. And again, I've kind of blazed through this, and this is meant to be more of a philosophical talk about like where we're having problems and why I don't think we're finding the risks that are actually out there. Again, real threat actors, nothing's out of scope. There is no time box assessment. You don't have to stop traffic at 5 p.m. or 2 p.m. or definitely not on Black Friday when a bunch of transactions are going down. That's the best time to do it. I think that complexity lowers the bar for good enough to the basement, and there's no one who is willing to call BS, in a sense, on a good job being done. It's also really hard to. You have to have some really deep skill sets to understand that someone hasn't just passed off vulnerability results to you. Not trying to pitch my company at all, but one of the things that I do in reports for anyone that I work for is that we detail all the ways that defenses stopped us as we were doing the assessment. The longest reports that we write are when there are no vulnerabilities found, because at least then you have a empirical artifact of all the things that they have done to cause pain to the attacker. And that's really what you want to do. Causing pain to the attacker is what stops them from attacking you. And I think that we've kind of gotten away from that recently. Hacking as a discipline is ultra commoditized. And what I mean by this is that I'm not seeing too many folks getting into pen testing or hacking who are really passionate about it. And this is not to dig on anyone with a degree in it, but now in order to get into pen testing, it's almost like you need pedigree. You need to have a cybersecurity master's, maybe you need to be from an Ivy League school. The bar to get in is so high, and a lot of us got in 15 or 20 years ago because we were maybe D- students in computer science. LLM brain rot is undeniable, and ChatGPT substitutions will not save the day. Again, most communications I'm seeing right now is someone massaging their stuff with an LLM. That comes to this person looks at that, uses an LLM to massage that output, that goes right back and forth. And we're seeing that in a lot of Confluence docs, a lot of Jira tickets. No one's really internalizing what's going on, and it's like everyone's kind of checked out. With AI hacking comes AI defense. It's just SQL map all over again. And again, I'm a bit of a purist on the pen testing side. When SQL map came out, people forgot how to do blind SQL injections by hand. And so now, instead of learning how packets travel over a network, it's going to soon turn into like, hey, ChatGPT, run a TCP dump on this network. And and that's fine. It's fine to do that stuff if it's really going to help you instead of testing 500 hosts in a week to 5,000. But the basics are going to become more important. And especially if you're a bug bounty hunter, new folks who are coming in today are using this to kind of kickstart their careers, which is fantastic, but they're going to lose some of the foundational stuff. I think that we are ripe for opportunity for business logic vulnerabilities and understanding where technology impact or intersects with the business and where that can be misused. I like to leave my slide for the end. I'm Kuskos. I've done several things. This isn't about me. This is more about what I think the state of pen testing is right now, what the state of security assessments really are, why we're missing stuff, and why we're still losing. Thanks. Happy hacking. And if there's any questions, please send them my way. Yep. They're going to be on the website. And if not, just email me. You'll get my raw notes and everything. All the real not safe for work stuff is in the bottom. Man, I cruise through that. I'm a real nervous talker. Yeah, so if you just go to, so he asked where can you get that 122 port list. If you just go to Nmap's main website, it's like Zenmap or Zendesk or something, not Zendesk, it's Zenmap I think. They have a statistical study that they've done of all the ports that have come through Nmap and where they've seen the most hits from. Now, it's not entirely prescriptive. It's really just a good place to start. But if you need to significantly cut traffic, you don't want to scan everything. And in fact, if you really do want to do that, do them both at the same time. But you want somewhere where you can get instant results that you can start looking at manually while the rest of the automation happens. And there's even a stronger multi-tiered approach that you can do. I actually do this in kind of 4 steps to cover absolutely everything. It takes about 2 hours on a Class C network. But that's what I start with. I start with that, I reread my scope doc, and then I start manually assessing the results that are trickling in through that so you can start getting familiar as the automation starts filling stuff out. And if you do that with 5,000 hosts, eventually you'll have a huge Excel spreadsheet and a huge pivot table that'll let you start looking at all the bounds and get a good spot.
When you're being on the other side of the getting with you to say, hey, do our pen test kind of thing,
yeah.
When they say, here's the URL, have fun, and you start finding all the other attachments, do you go back and say, okay, here's what we found, do you want us to continue, or do you just go?
So here's the URL, have fun, I think is a bit of a trap, because you're not setting expectations. And you have to, this is one fallacy I see where folks are like, okay, what matters the most to you? And they'll say PII or customer data. Like, obviously we know that. That doesn't need to be said. What matters the most to you should be answered more like which areas of the application are fragile so that care can be taken and they can still be assessed fully. Sometimes you don't want to throw automation at something, but you do want a rate limit and have well-crafted payloads so that you can still have some coverage of it. Otherwise, I think it needs to be noted as this thing could not be tested. And so although we've confirmed this entire area is good, this one bit is a blind spot, requires some extra due diligence. Same thing kind of happens when, let's say it's a black box assessment, it's time boxed, and you found a SQL injection vulnerability. I can spend, let's say that like I'm feeling something is vulnerable, but I just quite haven't popped it yet. But it's Wednesday, I've got to get through the whole assessment, and I have to decide, do I spend all Wednesday trying to break this thing because I have an ego, or do I ping the person and say, hey, is this an injectable query? Like, I don't have the code, just tell me, is it parameterized? Yes or no, and then you can move on and be judicious with your time. I really encourage people to do that instead of saying, like, I'm going to have no comms and we're going to have this great wall of China in between us for 5 days. The collaborative exercise will get you so many more results. Again, it depends. Some want an entirely black box hands-off assessment and others want to find their risks. And so it's just a matter of, I mean, if they want to spend 4 weeks on an assessment that can take 3 days, all right, write up the invoice. But that's probably not the best use of their money. And I think that a good security engineer would advise and consult on that and say, hey, based on the resources that you're spending, there's probably not a lot of return on this. Here are some other areas that we can also work on, and I think that's the move of integrity. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
You've got a way to counter LLM frameworks. You've got a way to help in the newer generations, people kind of come into the field. How do you stop it from dominating their inability to learn, I guess? I mean, it's true, all this is working now, but...
Yeah, okay, so just in case it wasn't picked up, he asked, how do you counter this LLM brain rot that we're seeing, which is in every industry, not just ours. For younger folks who are learning, I think that they need, much like most of us who were introduced to the internet for the first time at one point or time, you have to start getting this sense of, this is good information, that's bad information. This is someone trying to influence me to learn in this way, and this is how things actually are. I think just getting a little bit of wisdom, honestly, is kind of the only thing that's going to set you apart there. As a young person trying to get into a field and set themselves apart, they need all the help they can get, including what LLMs will auto-generate for them. Now, whether they internalize it or not is probably a lesson left to the reader or not. Cybersecurity is complicated. I don't blame someone for wanting to go straight to LLMs and explain exactly how packets work, because I remember reading RFCs and trying to understand it myself, whereas someone else could just be like, oh, here's same origin policy in 5 words or less, because I couldn't understand it otherwise. If I had that to kickstart my foundational knowledge and it was right, it would have probably been a lot easier earlier on. But then again, maybe that's why I now today know some of the more foundational stuff that I know other folks won't realize. So I think it's still out on that, let's see what happens. I don't really have a good answer for that one. It's a tough one across every industry, not just ours. Cool. Yeah, everyone's just vibe coding away. I didn't talk about it on here, but I have a persistent injection in my LinkedIn where a vendor reached out to me and spat out their SSH keys. So everyone's vibe coding away, learning about unsanitized input in some very real terms right now. Yeah. Probably. What do you do about that? The best you can. Try to be a good influence wherever you can. All right. Thank you very much.